Councillor John Sheehan to address you.
Good morning, everybody. Elected members, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished visitors. As Hourihane County Council, I want to begin by warmly welcoming you all to Limerick. I am particularly delighted to welcome delegates who have travelled from various parts of Ireland and throughout Europe to attend today. In fact, I know a number of speakers lined up to address today's seminar will be speaking about the experiences of local authorities in Ireland in relation to energy efficiency and the subject of financing. I'm happy to say that the actions that have been undertaken by the Council in the area of energy efficiency are in keeping with the support the objectives of the STEP project, which today's seminar forms part of. The public sector continues to face challenges in implementing local and regional policies to meet the EU targets for energy.
It's been a very interesting discussion so far, and appreciate the presentations from our guests and international speakers. As mentioned, we are the manager of the Irish Energy Efficiency Fund. I'm very happy to say that we'll be formally launching next week, along with the Minister for Energy. It's taken us a couple of months to get the legals sorted, as is the want of the lawyers, and being a lawyer myself by way of background. I'm used to feeling the pain for the client, so I'm delighted to say that as of today, it looks like we're complete in relation to our legal documents. So in terms of SDCL, we were appointed by government as preferred bidder in September to run the Irish Energy Efficiency Fund. We have a long-established track record of managing energy efficiency investments, including government-backed funds specialising in energy efficiency globally. We operate an investment advisory and an energy efficiency investment fund here in Ireland, which I manage and head up. We also operate funds in the UK in conjunction with the Green Investment Bank as a cornerstone investor, Hong Kong and China and Singapore. We finance the upfront capital cost of energy efficiency projects in both industrial, commercial and of course public sector. And so very interested in learning more here today about how public sector projects are being financed and the mechanisms for energy efficiency delivery and deployment in other member states. Our returns are structured as a return on the energy savings. So I think from a risk mitigation perspective and a financing perspective, we only get paid if there are energy savings from the project. So it's very much a performance-related payment that we receive. We work with ESCOs. We work directly with host projects. But in particular, in terms of project delivery and the basis upon which we fund, we will work with best-in-class energy services companies to deploy projects, for example, to the public sector, for which we would typically look for a performance guarantee from that ESCO. In particular, across public sector projects, we will look for projects that can be scaled both in an Irish context, obviously, and across the UK. So I can talk more about our investment model and our investment appetite and the areas that we'll be deploying capital for the Irish Fund. So as I mentioned, we manage the Green Investment Bank Fund in the UK for energy efficiency. This is a first-of-kind fund launched by the British government in which they committed 50 million sterling. There's 50 million matched private sector capital brought to the table there. Focus there is on building retrofit, combined heat and power, renewable heat, urban infrastructure. We were announced as preferred bidder for the Irish Fund here in September. We'll be formally launching the fund next week. So hot off the press, we're as I mentioned, we appear to be done today as regards the legals. Really excited about the opportunity here to make projects happen in an Irish context, as many of us will be familiar with, who've operated in the space here. Financing is one of the key constraints to making energy efficiency projects happen here. It will be a 70 million fund in Ireland, 35 of which is being committed by the Minister for Energy and government, 35 of which will be private sector capital, which SDCL has brought to the table through a number of substantial private sector investors, including Glendimplex Group, who will be investing 5 million as part of that private sector commitment. The investment focus will be on public sector buildings, urban infrastructure such as street lighting, obviously food and agriculture from an energy intensity perspective within Ireland, and obviously being able to facilitate competitiveness for agri-food companies, co-ops, meat processors that are competing not just in Ireland but obviously on a European and global scale. Hotels and data centres, and as I mentioned, street lighting. We also operate a government-backed fund in Singapore, which is solely focused on the manufacturing sector, and recently announced a UK-China energy efficiency fund whereby there will be private sector capital for Chinese energy efficiency projects using UK technologies, so technologies that are developed and created and deployed in the UK. That will also likely include perhaps some Irish technologies that international groups here are producing. So I hope it's apparent that energy efficiency is a space that we are very familiar with. We have a track record in it, and we also see the opportunity for producing deals in an Irish context, and that's, I hope, why we've been appointed by government to manage the fund here. I don't think I really need to address with any of the audience here as to what the opportunity is. I think we all realise that energy efficiency is a key opportunity for both enhancing or protecting security of supply in an Irish context, given that 86% of our energy is effectively imported in terms of a fossil fuel importation context. Obviously, energy demand reduction within buildings will very much contribute towards our 2020 targets, and the Irish government has committed to very ambitious, and they should be lauded for that, energy reduction targets in the context of the public sector in particular, with a 33% reduction by 2020 in terms of energy consumption within the public sector. From a policy perspective, our presence here and in the UK is facilitated by the clarity of policy that we have from the Irish government and the UK government in terms of not only implementing EU policy but also fairly innovative policies that the Irish state and groups within that have come up with, including SDAI. So I apologise to Alan Ryan. Alan has probably heard this presentation so many times in the last 2 months he could have actually given it. So maybe that would be efficient to do next time. The funds that we operate in both the UK, Singapore, and here are government-backed, and from that perspective, I think it's a key catalyst to facilitate a crowding in of capital to the energy efficiency sector. We realise that there's a substantial funding gap. I'm sure many of you within that are familiar with both public sector energy efficiency projects or on the delivery side will realise the constraints that are faced in relation to accessing finance. So that's what we do. We provide financing for energy efficiency projects, but we provide it in we think a very innovative way, which is effectively on a performance basis, whereby we only get paid for our energy savings materialise. Just to look in terms of our investment policy for the Irish fund, which will be of interest perhaps to certain people here today. As I said, it's a 70 million fund. We invest the entire upfront, up to the entire upfront capital cost of projects. So we're only paid by savings, but we will cover all of the costs, including the construction risk and operation and delivery risk over the life of the project. So we're not lending money. It's important. We're not a debt provider. It doesn't have to appear on a private sector host's balance sheet, and there are certain issues, obviously, from a government debt and deficit treatment perspective that raise issues from an accounting perspective for our public sector projects. But I don't think that will in any way restrict public sector deal flow for us. Up to 50% of the fund here will be deployed to building retrofit. So typical deal size we envisage once the market starts to happen here, including in conjunction with SEAI and the development of the exemplar projects that the guys are working on, will be typically 1 to 2 million. Typical building here won't be necessarily 100,000. We're probably realistically looking at 25 to 50,000 square feet. These will be public or private sector buildings, so schools, hospitals, factories. Ideally, the payback you'll be looking at here for retrofit will be 2 to 5 years, with a typical contract term of 5 to 10 years. I appreciate each project will be different, so these are really just yardsticks to give you. Again, interventions, we won't take technology risk on projects, so we're not going to be using anything that isn't proven. So LED lighting, HVAC, integrated building management systems, chillers, pumps, CHP, speed drives, VSDs. And again, in terms of sectors, we'll be focusing on education, healthcare, industrial, so high energy intensity, data centers, retail to an extent, technology parks in conjunction with the IDA, and obviously public buildings. CHP, so up to 20% of the fund can be deployed to CHP. That's a restriction that has been included in our fund with the government. So typically we would like to do deals in the region of 3 to 6. I appreciate CHP for certain hospitals will be below 1 to 3 megawatts. In fact, for many projects, it could be anything from sort of 250 up to 500 kilowatt engines. There obviously needs to be an appropriate heat load for CHP to work. So in that regard, it'll be typically deployed within the public sector across hospitals, universities, data centres, and district heating is an area that we'd certainly be interested in looking at. So I know that there are a number of projects currently within the feasibility stage within certain local authorities that are looking at district heating. We're keen to progress a discussion with those hosts to see whether or not there's an opportunity to access our equity and to help develop those projects out. Payback for CHP will be 4 to 7 years predominantly. Typical contract term 7 to 15 years. And obviously from an intervention perspective, that'll be in relation to heat, electricity, water. And again, typical sectors will be healthcare, education, universities, local authorities. I think distributed energy for local authorities will become ever more important towards 2020. I'm certainly keen to discuss that with any local authorities that are here today and going forward. And similarly, private sector clients. So we've just completed a retrofit of a large Dublin-based hotel where we installed a CHP engine in conjunction with a cascade boiler system. The savings therefrom are actually quite substantial. Renewable heat, again up to 20%. So combined heat and power, but with a focus on biomass. Obviously, the typical clients for that will be off-gas grid, and the provision of sustainable heat for public and private sector facilities. So in particular, if the heat load were appropriate, we would be very interested in looking at local authorities where you have, for example, swimming pools, and you have that constant heat load requirement. Or if there's an opportunity for conversion into cooling. So certainly we've looked at with a number of agri-food companies here already at the opportunity to use biomass CHP in conjunction with taking off the CO2 emissions from that combustion process and using the CO2 towards growing some of the horticultural products that are produced by some of these agri-food companies. 6 to 8 years, 10 to 20 years for a contract term. So I think the beauty of our fund is that because we're not a debt provider and we're not a bank and we invest on an equity basis, we will not be constrained by the tenor of our contracts. So we can fund a 20-year project. We will fund a public lighting project that will be 20 years. We can fund a CHP project that will take 20 years. So we're not in any way constrained by looking at a short payback period. Obviously, we'll seek to have a blended portfolio across the fund, but I think it's important to say that from a public sector perspective as well, we can fund deep retrofit projects, and we can fund them on a long-term basis. The key thing for us is that we have a creditworthy ESCO delivering that, who can give us a performance guarantee, ideally, in relation to the savings and on the operation and maintenance side of things, and that we have a creditworthy host counterparty. So very happy to work with the public sector and public sector bodies. For us, there will be certain sectors in Ireland that will prove challenging to fund. So there will be hotels here that we won't fund because we won't be sure that they're actually here in 5 years to be able to pay back the capital cost of the project. And then in relation to urban infrastructure, I suppose the key components of that will be public street lighting, and again sort of district heating. We're very interested in looking at street lighting here. We've been involved in a number of street lighting projects in the UK already that have been successfully implemented and funded. We are discussing and working with a number of local authorities here in the context of developing a model street lighting contract. My previous role as a lawyer involved working with some of these local authorities in relation to how those contracts might be structured, and working with Ireland and SCAI. The key thing for us on that will obviously be the lighting, the technology, and it's proven. It'll be the warranties that can be extended to us as the funder. And it will be the track record and delivery from the energy services company. And again, there are substantial savings, as we all know, in relation to street lighting here, both on the lighting side, and then also as technology becomes more proven in relation to the centralized management system, sensors that will be deployed in public lighting. So that's a flavour of the sort of projects that we look at. In terms of our approach, we work directly with ESCOs, so we fund ESCOs to deliver projects. So as part of your procurement process, we would issue a term sheet to an ESCO to fund their project and project delivery. So assuming that they were successful in their appointment, we would fund the project on an equity basis. we are heavily involved in both the financing solution and also on the contractual side of things. So again, to the extent that our team comprises tax, accountancy, private equity, real estate, lawyers, we have a team in place that will actually work with both the host project as appropriate and or the ESCO to deliver a best-in-class solution for an energy efficiency project. So to that extent, that involves tax advice, it involves on-off balance sheet treatment and a review, working in particular with the host auditors. It involves restructuring the contracts so that in relevant circumstances it can obtain off-balance sheet treatment. It involves us drafting and working on the project agreements, on the O&M side of things, on the energy performance contract, and to that extent we'll be basing our EPC here on the model framework that FCAI have developed over the past 18 months or so. It's a very good document, and it's one of the key aspects of this market is the potential transaction costs associated with delivering energy efficiency, and I think the model contract has gone a long way to reducing those transaction costs, and it should be broadly welcomed, or warmly welcomed, not broadly welcomed, warmly welcomed. And because we take an equity approach, we can work with financial institutions. So we will, on larger deals, we will be able to work with banks. So there's an opportunity for us to invest equity and also to leverage a deal whereby we would be able to bring in competitively priced debt at the appropriate time. But just in terms of how we work by way of financing, we're an equity provider, so we're not lending. We invest on the merits of a project. So to that extent, we can fund up to 100% of the capital cost of the project, and we're paid back through the energy savings. We only get paid if the savings materialise. So to that extent, the contractual structure is particularly important for us. The risk sits with us in respect of a project. So from a public sector perspective, the public sector knows that in contracting with an ESCO and ourselves, they will not be on the hook for the savings materialising. If the savings don't happen, the public sector will have a performance guarantee from us and the ESCO that the savings should be happening. So they don't pay a penny. You still get the benefit of all of the new equipment that's going to be put in place. But from our perspective, it's obviously very important that we are comfortable from a technical due diligence perspective that the savings will actually materialise. That's the basis upon which we fund it. And typically we'll seek the performance guarantee from the energy services company that if those savings don't materialise, that energy services company is going to have to write a cheque. So the host gets the savings. Some of the savings are passed back to us to pay our capital costs and margin. But we think our model should have a substantial uptake here in Ireland because the risk all sits with us as a financier and the ESCO in terms of the project delivery. So this is a typical example of a sort of 6-year contract that we would do with a 1 million energy spend. 25% savings can be implemented by way of the energy efficiency project, lighting, insulation, plant upgrades, voltage optimization. So immediately the host project benefits from positive cash flow of, for example, €50,000 out of the 250,000 savings. We, for our financing, take 200 over the 6-year term. So in effect, the margin is 200 to finance that. After which, the host will retain all of those savings. But I think not just in terms of the positive cash flow, but the co-benefits associated with the new technologies immediately installed should also be recognised, and many of you will be familiar with that. You've obviously new equipment, you've lower operation and maintenance costs, you have productivity benefits. There's a very interesting publication, a report that's just been produced by Skanska and the World Green Building Council, looking at the co-benefits associated with greener buildings and energy efficiency retrofits. That's an important document, and more study needs to be put into this area because the co-benefits associated with energy efficiency and building retrofit, including the health benefits, worker productivity, also need to be quantified. They need to be substantiated because this isn't just about having nice lighting. There's a lot that goes with being able to retrofit a building and having it more efficient than just the energy consumption. Typical model that we use is, I'm sorry, how am I doing for time? Please. Push it on? Not great? Okay, not great is never what we want to hear. Typical structure, maybe just briefly to run through. For a private sector client, we create a special purpose company to invest in a project. So the host project would typically contract with us by way of an energy savings agreement to deliver the project, deliver the energy savings. We would then subcontract our special purpose company. We would subcontract with an ESCO to deliver that. So the ESCO will take the risk for performance, operation and maintenance, and we would work with the ESCO and the host on creating an independent monitoring and verification report to ensure that there are no arguments about the energy savings actually materializing. So we would, like many of you will be familiar with, work to traditionally IPMVP in terms of that protocol. There have been other stipulated savings models that we've looked at, but the key for us is that at the end of each quarter or the end of each month, when there's a payment to be made, we want to know that there's going to be no disagreement about the savings. And I think if there's an upfront M&V plan to clearly delineate and define how the savings are going to be calculated and verified, well then that reduces the scope for argument and people falling out. So the investors, or in this case the fund that we manage, will capitalise that SPV. And again, it's an equity approach. So we take this performance-based approach. We're not lending to a host. We're not going to require security from the host or from the public sector. It's only based on the savings actually materialising. So it's quite a novel approach, and we hope, and I've seen in the UK, and we hope from an Irish context that it's a type of investment mechanism and funding mechanism for energy efficiency that will mean deals get done quickly and more efficiently. And because, again, we're not a debt provider, we can invest during a construction phase in a project, so a very large construction phase that may take, say, 3 to 6 months. We can facilitate a drawdown of capital for the ESCO during that period, and we take the construction risk on that, where a typical financial institution or a lender won't be able to lend to that project until there are cash flows materialising and demonstrable. So our approach means that we get more deals done, and we can take appropriately managed risks that other financial institutions won't take. And it just means that from our perspective, we obviously understand and need to understand the sector to make these deals work. The host can terminate the energy services agreement at any time by writing a cheque for effectively the net present value of the cash flow of that contract on a discounted basis. And again, with private sector clients, we've worked on a number of UK deals and are currently working on an Irish deal here, where the host auditor is accepting that the structure that we and the ESCO are delivering will be treated off balance sheet. It's a very important issue for private sector clients who have perhaps overly leveraged, who are stretched from a balance sheet perspective, or who simply don't want to take debt onto their balance sheet. We structure it so that we will bear the risk, and ultimately the host doesn't need to worry that its balance sheet is being impacted, and similarly the host knows that it's going to get the savings at the end of each month because of the performance guarantee. Really quickly, and the case studies will be in the presentation, I'm sure, as it's uploaded. We recently closed a deal for a number of private car parks with NCP in the UK. Again, from an implementation risk perspective, it was an interesting one. We needed to obtain a treasury guarantee to mitigate the credit risk of the host in that case. Very substantial savings, as you probably know, from LEDs. We closed 149 car parks with NCP. Again, LED in an Irish context, whether it's retail, hotels, street lighting, is an area that we see substantial potential in. Kingspan, one of our leading energy efficiency manufacturers and technology companies, one of our largest companies. This is one of our exemplar funding projects in the UK. I think it was the first deal that we closed with the Green Investment Bank. We funded their manufacturing facility in Holywell. And again, you can see from the contract term, it was a substantially longer term than you would see most institutions funding. 11.5-year contract term, delivered by Johnson Controls. Very interesting one because Kingspan produce insulation for, they're one of the largest insulation manufacturers globally. And yet, they wanted to retrofit and be best in class in terms of energy efficiency for their own facilities and practice what they preach. They're not a company that has capital constraints. They could have funded this themselves, but they saw the benefits of the skill set that we were bringing and the expertise that we were bringing. And we hope that will translate with Irish companies, with sites that we'll be working with here as well. And again, Kingspan will be another entity that we'll be working with in an Irish context, we hope. Just the final one that I'd touch upon is a project we did in the UK with Mid Devon District Council. And I joke with my group CEO. You know, the council were very happy with the delivery by the ESCO and with the funding model that we were able to deploy. So that involved the retrofit of a local authority building, leisure centre, and a smallish car park for the local authority. But from an M&V perspective, everything is working much more efficiently. There were substantial savings from the project, but the co-benefits were again something that the council were very interested in. And I'm looking forward to trying to come up with an M&V plan where you quantify a child being happy with the temperature of a swimming pool and what value that brings to a project. So I'm going to just very quickly maybe skip through it, and you know, you can look at any of the slides on the presentation. But very happy to take questions if there are any questions in relation to the fund. We're open for business and very keen to discuss opportunities with any of the public sector bodies or local authorities that are here. And thank you for the invitation.